Absolutely fantastic. Arsenal score 5 once again in a brilliant result and secure the perfect Christmas gift. This is the Arsenal Raw Reaction Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Raw Reaction Show. Joining you after the evening before, where Arsenal won not just 2, 3, or 4 goals to the good, but 5-1 against Crystal Palace away from home to break yet more records. Fantastic to see it done in this kit because we needed to kind of get that kind of issue away from us as well. And I know I've not got the right colour scheme for what is usually the Raw Reaction Show, but because it's such a curse-breaking episode, I thought we'd go full Microsoft screensaver for today's episode. But good morning to those joining us live in the chat box. Appreciate you all being here, of course. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. Please do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Black Shine, Paul, Matt G, Steve, good morning to you, to Shari, to Zoom, good morning to Wayne and Gooner76, good morning to Paul and Damien and Rich, good morning to Barry and P Sharp. We've got Olawale, we've got Loga and Stephen and Owen in the chat, Amira, Stephen, Steve, Maximius, Marasilki, and plenty more of you guys and girls as well. But without further ado, we're going to jump straight into things. Do make sure you're dropping a like. Do make sure you're subscribing and all that usual YouTube-y stuff. We start with just kind of an overall consensus of how great it was. And to tell you about a record that actually fell yesterday as well as a result of that victory too. Arsenal scored 5 or more goals in 6 different away games in all competitions in 2024, which is the most ever by an English top-flight club in a single calendar year. We've complained at times, about how ruthless we can be in front of goal, about how we don't score enough goals. But this result, on top of the West Ham result, of course, earlier on in this very season, the Sporting result, on top of games like Sheffield United and West Ham as well, have seen Arsenal be able to reach this quite significant milestone and stand out alone, playing Mikel Arteta football as well, and very rarely needing to rely on a set piece as well for those goals. Also, a fantastic result for Arsenal, pushing them further up the table and closing the gap to those around us, of course, ahead of today's games. Meanwhile, the lineup certainly raised a couple of eyebrows as well. There wasn't too much to be said about the back five. Raya, Timber, Saliba, Gabriel, and Lewis Skelly were my selections for this game. But we did talk about in yesterday morning show the potential for the midfield to include Kai Havertz. And indeed, that is exactly what Arteta went with Thomas Partey sitting in the midfield, Kai Havertz and Martin Ødegaard playing as attacking midfielders. The front three, unsurprisingly, Gabriel Jesus keeping his position, Martinelli on the left, and Bukayo Saka, who we'll talk about more shortly, on the right-hand side. But it is quite the comeback at Christmas that we are seeing for Gabriel Jesus. Right place, right time for the first goal. Cross, of course, from the right from Bukayo Saka on his right foot. Very impressive indeed. Little touchdown from Gabriel before it led to Jesus then smashing the ball in low into the bottom left-hand corner. I guarantee you that a few weeks ago, if in the same position, I'm not sure if he takes that shot first time or if he takes a touch first or just hits a player, but it shows you exactly what confidence can do to somebody and how much better they can be knowing that indeed their number seems to have been called at the right time. And of course, it was a second goal as well that he got just before Palace. Sorry, it wasn't before Palace scored. We should talk about the Palace goal first, really, shouldn't we? Because the defending for this goal was absolutely atrocious. Somehow Palace given so much space. First, Thomas Partey is absolutely nowhere and allowing Ismail Assar to kind of run into that unoccupied zone in front of the back four. Unable to catch him before then William Saliba steps off and steps off and steps off, and eventually Sarr can just ping the ball into the bottom right-hand corner, and suddenly all that energy and good feeling evaporated quite quickly. But thankfully, once again, Gabriel Jesus was there to finish into the top right-hand corner. Another set-piece goal. Ball comes in, of course. It's set down by Gabriel first. Then I think Partey gets the touch on it to kind of lay off Jesus, who's kind of lurking and ready to kind of smash the ball in. But again, another brilliant finish from Gabriel Jesus to give Arsenal a 2-1 lead. But then, arguably for many, the biggest highlight of the game of all wasn't amongst any of the goals, but instead was a very worrying injury for Arsenal's best player, Bukayo Saka, with a hamstring issue to his right leg that meant that he left the ground on crutches. Now, that is obviously precautionary that he's on crutches. It would be that case no matter how serious the injury might be, just so that you can protect the muscle as much as possible. Hamstring injuries are very varying in their severity. If you can have a minor hamstring strain that will force you off and will force you to ground, it can be a matter of weeks. If indeed you suffer something of a tear, like Kieran Tierney did against, I can't remember who it was against, but it might have been Slovenia or Slovakia in the Euros. But Kieran Tierney, of course, had to leave the field on a stretcher because he tore his hamstring. And that was a serious grade injury that meant that he missed months. So it's very difficult to know. Now, the good news is Saka was able to leave the field under his own steam, but of course was seen leaving the ground on crutches at the time. So that hopefully gives a small indication that it's not as serious as a Kieran Tierney type problem, but it could still be weeks that we see him missing. It could still be longer than that. And until we get a press conference from Mikel Arteta, which of course will take place ahead of the game against Ipswich, we will not have any idea or any indication about just how bad or how serious Bukayo Saka's injury is. He'll have scans, and then he'll be in a situation where he simply needs to rest and recover. Now, Saka has been playing minutes, so many minutes, and it's very difficult to be in a position like Arsenal are right now, because this season our misfortune has been a joke. Losing Martin Odegaard for how long we lost Martin Odegaard, now losing Bukayo Saka for what could be a considerable injury as well. He's already had one issue. He suffered a hamstring injury with England while on international duty. That meant he missed the game against Bournemouth and had to be rushed back for the game against Liverpool, which he couldn't unfortunately finish that game either, and had to be replaced in the second half. Was not fully fit for that fixture, nor was he fully fit for the game against Newcastle. He was rushed back for those games, I think, and maybe that rushing back and the number of minutes that he's playing, I think, has contributed to this ticking time bomb almost with his hamstring that has reached this stage. Hopefully now he will get the recovery and rest that is needed to rest and recover that awful situation, and that he will be back on the field with Arsenal. But in the meantime, it was very encouraging indeed to see how Arsenal responded to that injury. And they went through and scored their third, courtesy of Kai Havertz. Another opportunity, of course, for Gabriel Jesus. Really fantastic header. Really unfortunate that we saw kind of this header hit the post. But a striker's instinct with Kai Havertz going into the right place at the right time and finishing into the bottom left-hand corner. A really good game, I thought, overall from Kai Havertz. He was progressive. He was in the right places. He was threatening and playing in midfield, playing in this attacking midfield position that very few of us have really been on the side of seeing him play regularly again. But it shows you, I think, the potential. But with Saka out injured, I do think there's going to be an argument that Gabriel Jesus and Havertz both field themselves in those attacking positions. Jesus perhaps on the right or the left, Martinelli on the right or the left as well. And speaking of Gabriel Martinelli, Ian Wright admitted to have sent a message earlier on in the week to Martinelli to give him some words of encouragement and support. And it seems that worked, because Martinelli was much more aggressive in this game. He really did take the ball to the opposition, and it was great to see him get his goal on the day. Yes, there's some fortune about it, but it's instinctual off the back of a Declan Rice shot, redirecting the ball into the back of the net. Really impressed with how he performed on the right flank at times, and he was threatening. And that's a good sign when we need somebody to come in and cover that right-hand side, potentially in the near future. And then the fifth goal, deck the halls, or you just, because Declan Rice, fantastic strike, comes off the bench, doesn't play the 6 role, plays the left 8 role, and then moves into that left-hand half space, curls a ball into the bottom right-hand corner, very similar to Sarr's finish in the first half, to secure the points and secure a very Merry Christmas indeed for Arteta and Arsenal. Now, speaking of some of the other players that need to be mentioned, this was a concerning display from William Saliba. It was far from his best day. A few mistakes could have been really costly at times. One of them was quite costly at the time when we conceded to Ismaila Sarr's strike. But of course, it was the mistake he made in giving the ball away to initially, I think it was Sarr and then Mateta getting the opportunity to shoot. And that brings us to another highlight that we need to talk about, and that's to shout out David Raya, who, without a doubt, is one of the big reasons why Arsenal were able to go through and win this game as comfortably as they did, because had Mateta been able to get the score to 2-2 with his opportunity after that Saliba mistake, who knows what the score might have been on the day. But David Raya was excellent. Once again, really, really strong in goal, made a couple of really big saves, some really good distribution, very aware. It's without doubt, one of the best signings I think Arsenal have made under Mikel Arteta's tenure. David Raya is proven to be, without a doubt, I think the league's best goalkeeper this season. I think he's overtaken what we've seen of some of the others. Of course, Alisson and Edison's injuries and own issues have meant that Raya has taken advantage of that. And I think that he is at the moment the undisputed goalkeeper of the season so far, and has been excellent for Arsenal. And there is no longer any debate about that position. Elsewhere, before we go to part two and your questions and thoughts on the game, we need to talk about, of course, the other results that happened after or before Arsenal's 5-1 win. West Ham United drawing 1-1 with Brighton and Hove Albion. Mohamed Kudus getting on the score sheet there. Nottingham Forest, another really impressive victory for them away from home against Brentford. Brentford, of course, will be hosting Arsenal in a couple of weeks. That's actually Brentford's first home defeat, I think, of the season. So coming at quite a good time, I think, for Arsenal then to go there on New Year's Day to try and get a result. And meanwhile, Ipswich, who Arsenal play next at the Emirates, were beaten 4-0 to a Newcastle side that included a hat-trick from Alexander Isak on the day as well, who again cannot seem to stop scoring at the moment. But the biggest result, of course, of the day in terms of just the Premier League neutral was the two teams that have been more out of form than any other. Aston Villa going into this game were 10 points worse off at this point compared to last season. Manchester City 6 points worse off going into this point as well. But they lose again. 9 defeats in 12 games. And it is a 1-2 in the opposite direction that the scoreline indeed was in this early afternoon kickoff. John Duran getting the first goal, Morgan Rogers scoring a brilliant second, and Phil Foden's very late consolation goal could do nothing to stop them dropping yet more points, meaning that Arsenal have moved 6 clear of their old title rivals. But today's games are more important for Arsenal. Early kickoffs on the day, Everton against Chelsea, hoping that Everton can do us a favour like they didn't do when they came to the Emirates, of course, last week. Fulham taking on Southampton in what is Juric's first game as Southampton boss. Leicester City take on Wolves in one of the biggest relegation battles of the season. Huge 3 points on offer for either of those two teams. And then Manchester United, who will be responding, of course, from their League Cup defeat to Spurs, take on Bournemouth. Meanwhile, speaking of Tottenham, they host Liverpool. Arsenal again in a position hoping for their North London rivals to do them a favour. All I can say to this is thank goodness it isn't taking place right at the end of the season, and it isn't a meaningful game in terms of it being a decider. So Spurs actually have a reason to try and get some points in this one. But whether they do or not remains to be seen. Right, let's go to part two, shall we? Your questions and more right after this. Okay, this is part two of the show. We tackle your questions and more in the chat box. If you've got any questions, any thoughts from the game, any feelings about how things are right now at the club, any reaction to the Saka injury or to any of the individual performances, or looking ahead maybe to the January transfer window, get your comments and your thoughts into the chat because it is very, very, very exciting. Despite the fact that there is, of course, some continued concerns like Saka, as we know. But I think that there's still plenty of optimism and positivity back at Arsenal, which is a really, really good place to be. And also we need to do, before I forget, someone gives me a reminder, to do our advent calendar. There's only 3 more days until Christmas, 22nd of December this morning. And we find our number 22 on the left-hand side. And our good friend, after a 5-1 win, 5-star performance, a 5-star dairy milk to go in the pocket as well. Lovely stuff. Right, let's go into the chats and tackle these thoughts. Please make sure you're dropping a like on the video, of course, as well. Subscribing if you're new. If you're listening on audio platforms, head over to YouTube. Let us know some of your thoughts and drop a like on the way as well. Fergus says, it's like I wrote your script, Tom. I know, he's saying there has to be a special mention for Raya, how he kept us in the game, what's happening to the best defensive pairing recently. Gabriel and Saliba not having the best of games defensively in this one, that is for sure. Maximia says, David Raya is my man of the match. Without his saves, we may not have been so comfortable. And Rob says, yes, finally, someone giving Raya his flowers. I've been disappointed with other content creators not recognizing his massive contribution. Kept us in the lead. Without his saves, the game could have been very, very different indeed. I just think that Raya deserves so much extra, because he doesn't get talked about enough. He doesn't get his credit. Like, you think about the Allisons and Edisons of this world, always getting the credit for what their performances have given to Liverpool and Manchester City. Raya deserves to be talked about now in that bracket for me at the moment. At this very moment in time, he's producing performances at that level, and he's been absolutely excellent for us. Burmese Goodness says, morning, Tom. Funny old game, football, isn't it? Do you think that we can go on a run now and catch Liverpool, or are we getting overindulgent just because it's Christmas? Nothing wrong with being a little bit overindulgent at Christmas, my friend. But what I would say is that we do need to keep our feet on the ground. There's a lot of football still to come, especially with January. January is a very, very difficult run of games for Arsenal. We go to Brighton, we host Newcastle in the League Cup, we have Man United at home in the FA Cup, we then have the North London Derby, we then host a Villa side who could be back in form by that point. We then have a very important Champions League game, and we need to try and win that to secure the top 8 of the competition. We then go away to Wolves, which has notoriously been a pretty tricky ground for us to go to in the past. And then that final Champions League game before the first game of February is hosting Manchester City. The rest of February, though, looks a little bit nicer, although there is a game away at Nottingham Forest also to navigate before then April comes around with March, with some very big games as well for the Gunners to consider, and an international break where they will finally get a rest, but that will not come before Arsenal host Chelsea in a very important game for the Gunners as well. Benny says, not a lot is being spoken about Partey's performance. I don't think he had a good game, first half especially. I did mention in that the slide about Palace scoring that I think when you're playing with 2 attacking midfielders in your midfield 3, I think that Declan Rice, and it's only Declan Rice didn't start this game because obviously he only had 1 training session, so I've got an issue with him not starting. But I think in future, when you're going to play with those Havertz, Odegaard type positions, I think Rice and his mobility and his running and his recovery speed is going to be the better option than Partey, who didn't have a very good day. And I think that the midfield selection exposed some of Partey's shortcomings. Partey's always going to be better when he's got a Rice or a Marino, I think, next to him. But when you're playing with Havertz and Odegaard, I think Rice is definitely the better pick. Rich says, do Saliba's mistakes mean that we need a backup to put pressure on him? I just want to buy Vita Rice, says Rich. I mean, we do lack something of a right-sided centre-half cover to Saliba. Of course, with Ben White out, we've only really got Timber. Tomiyasu as well, with him out as well. It's another situation where we are finding ourselves a little short because you've got such a standout player. It's very similar to kind of the Saka situation. It's really difficult to have depth in those positions. It's really difficult to have depth in a position where you've got such an unequivocal starter. I've seen people try to put the point across that Arsenal's supposed poor planning in the transfer window has seen them kind of suffer this issue with Saka's injury. But the reality is, as we've talked about before, we have struggled, as have Liverpool, to find a right-sided deputy to Salah in the same way that we have with Saka. If you look at Liverpool's attacking options, Jota, Gakpo, Diaz, and Nunez, all of those players are primarily either central or left-sided players. Jota has covered on the right-hand side, but it makes up a very small proportion of the number of minutes that he has played. And when you look at the majority of the minutes that all those 4 players have played for Liverpool, they've either come on the left-hand side or through the middle. And that's even with Salah being played as much as Salah is played. Bukayo Saka, of course, has needed rests at times. And he did get a rest in the League Cup earlier in the season. And we've tried to manage his minutes, but he's also had his own injury issues that he suffered with England. It's not just an Arsenal thing. England have played Saka unnecessarily where they didn't need to. earlier on in the campaign, prior to those injuries that he suffered. So it's, for me, very, very difficult for you to go out into the market and sign a player that you can bring in to be as competent and as competitive as your other attackers, who is primarily going to give you what Saka gives you. It's so difficult to find that. Now, I think Arsenal need to go out into the market in January and try and convince Bryan Mbeumo to sign for Arsenal. That would be the personal dream signing for me in January, because I don't see that dream centre forward happening. And I think Bryan Mbeumo would offer Arsenal a lot. And I think that his right-hand sided kind of preference helps, but also he plays through the middle. And that could also offer Arsenal plenty of depth at centre forward, should we need it up until the summer when we can sign somebody. So I think that Bryan Mbeumo would be a really, really good option for Arsenal to consider now and into the future. And he's earned a move of that level. And I think that would be a very astute piece of business by Arsenal indeed, if we were. Roy says, Tom, judging by the officials yesterday, are the rules of the PGMOL that the officials must look at a Howard Webb right said Fred Tribute Act? It's horrendous, isn't it? Like, some of the decisions we're seeing, some of the tackles that are going unpunished, it's a joke, quite frankly. There was a tackle, can I see if I can find it? You might even be able to remind me. There was a tackle yesterday that should have received a red card in the Premier League. It was in the West Ham game. It was Estupinan, I think it was, on... Was it Kilman? Yes, Kilman. That tackle is a potential leg breaker. That could break Max Kilman's leg. And the fact that he's won the ball first means nothing. He's out of control. He studs up. He's two-footed. He connects with Kilman's shin. It is a horrendous challenge. Absolutely horrendous challenge. We also had a tackle yesterday on Calafiori that was studs down on Calafiori's ankle. Yes, there was a lot of noise made by the Italian, who was able to continue. But again, it's a horrendous tackle and arguably a red card. These players are being allowed far too much rope to be able to tackle with such force and aggression and a lack of control. And there really does need to be a crackdown on these type of tackles. They are horrendous, absolutely horrendous at the moment. All this is, I still love a left footer on the right, as Saka as a replacement. Football has evolved, and obviously it's very hard to find somebody. The reason why Arsenal haven't signed somebody who is a right winger, who is left-footed, is mainly because, and I'll give you an example actually. Newcastle United are supposedly looking at Bakayoko, but the Arsenal links to him, the PSV winger, were quickly kind of played down. Because he said that he wanted to play regularly. And so there was no extra movement on that deal for Arsenal to pursue kind of a player like Bakayoko, because he's turned out in interviews and said, I only want to play and I'm not going to go somewhere I'm not going to play. And it's as simple as that. You're never going to sign a player that's going to know that they're going to be back up to Bukayo Saka. And of course, Raheem Sterling, Man Lutata in the chat, saying it's Sterling time now. He's also now injured. Got injured in training yesterday or the day before yesterday. And it's incredibly frustrating that this misfortune that keeps on happening for us. I have never experienced a season quite like what Arsenal are experiencing now. It's absolutely insane what Arsenal are having to deal with this season. And if Arsenal sadly don't go on to win the league, I think there is significant reason behind that, because of the injuries that Arsenal have had to deal with to such key players in their team throughout the campaign that have proven costly. Now, Bukayo Saka, of course, is only just out injured, and we will see the ramifications of that moving forwards. But losing Odegaard in the games that we did, losing Ben White for these games that we have, and other issues that have befallen our side, like Tomiyasu, of course, his injuries, Calafiori, his injuries, Zinchenko, his injuries. We've just been so poorly hit with these problems, and that's a big frustration. I saw a question about Mbeumo. Stephen says, is Mbeumo a realistic signing in January? I don't think so. Brentford would demand silly money, just like they have with Tony. It's worth pointing out that Mbeumo's contract runs through until 2026. They do have an option of a further year, but he is reaching that critical point of his time with the club that if they want to make a big fee and avoid a situation where they lost out on quite a significant amount of money with Tony, I think this could be an opportunity if Arsenal are willing to spend the money on that player. Tony says, great result, but Saliba looked a bit shaky. Martinelli looked brilliant on the right, and with Saka out for 3 weeks, this could be a good fit. Joey says, at this rate, Tom is going to suit up for Arsenal in the upcoming weeks. At this rate, it's going to happen, mate. Stephen says, it's just so typical that when Saka gets injured, Sterling got injured on the day before, the left-back situation all over again. Martinelli did look good, though, at right wing. Tom says, I really don't care if we pay silly money in January. We made a lot of money selling Eddie and Aaron. Let's spend it. Trophies and good results earn you money as well. And I've said this before, like Arsenal made a lot of money on deadline day for Ramsdale and Eddie and Nketiah. Let's reinvest that money in January and go and get Brian and Mbeumo. Stephen says, Timber will get injured next and then we'll have no specialised right back. Can we all touch wood, please, simultaneously? Stephen's kind of bring down the house here. Arthur says, what do you think about teams playing low blocks against us compared to those coming out to play? Arsenal need to be aware that teams are going to do this, Arthur, at the end of the day. Teams are going to try and deploy. I don't think that Palace necessarily played a low block against us yesterday at all. I think they tried to hit on the counter with a mid-block, and that's something that teams like Fulham and Everton, less so Everton, more so Fulham in particular, have had more joy against Arsenal. The mid-block has been very, very potent for those teams. So I think that that's something to consider. That's something to look into. But I think actually Arsenal dealt with the mid-block yesterday very, very well indeed. And it's something that should certainly be looked into as a success overall in Arsenal's season, is that this time they managed to overcome that problem. I did see a mention of Marcus Rashford. Arasilki says no to Marcus Rashford. Fergus says, what's your view on Rashford and would you see him as a good fit at Arsenal? My instinct is definitely a no right now. I'm not interested in signing Marcus Rashford at all. Just having a quick look at his numbers. He's played 50 games in his career on the right-hand side, scoring 13 goals and getting 7 assists. It's not a favoured position of Rashford at all. He's played, hundreds of games through the middle or on the left-hand side. He's played there 3 times for Man United this season. He played there 4 times for Man United last season. He played there 4 times the season before that. He played there 11 times in 21-22, but only returned 1 goal in those 11 games. He doesn't tend to be too impactful when playing on the right-hand side. So it's not like all of a sudden Saka's injury means that Rashford becomes a lot more realistic. If it happens, which I'd be surprised if it did, obviously I'd back the guy to do well, and I hope that he would succeed. But I agree with Arasilki that it's a no for me for Rashford. Trader Mike says, although agreeing with Raya being sensational after his early error, I thought Saliba was also better after his. I think I would dispute balance with the up on one so much and down on the other. Raya did have a mistake, to be fair, that we've not covered too much. He did play that ball out to Partey, which really didn't nearly prove costly. I think that's actually more about the defensive passing to Raya in those situations, similar to what we saw with Fraser Forster against Man United in midweek as well. Saliba did improve, but I think that the pressure was certainly off as the game went on, Mike, because Arsenal gained control of the match with such a high scoring rate, and then Palace kind of foresaw that they weren't going to get anything from it and then just kind of managed it and tried to keep the score down as much as they could, but they couldn't. So I think the game state suited Saliba a lot more when the pressure was up, but when the pressure was on Raya, he tended to deliver a lot more. Stephen says, what about Mbeumo? Does Arsenal have the funds to spend on him? Would he cost at least 60 million? I don't know what his price tag would be. Arsenal do have some financial freedom to spend, I think, around 40-50 million pounds on a player in January, and so I'd be looking to not really go too much over 40 million from Mbeumo. He's only, as I say, got just over 2 years left, or just over 1 + 1 year left on his contract. So I think we need to be looking at that as a potential option. Maximia says, Tom, a word on George Easton, our ex-captain and World Cup winner as well. Yes, of course, Arsenal were wearing black armbands yesterday. We saw, I always find it at times, it's a shame when we have kind of these away games and then kind of nothing's said in the following home game. I sincerely hope that something is said in the next home game, because George Easton was, in terms of playing in the 60s, an incredible part of that squad. And I know a lot of younger listeners, and to myself, you educate yourself about Arsenal's past, but he played for Arsenal for 6 years in the early part of the 60s as well. He was our captain between 1963 and 1966. And yes, I am reading these stats because I wanted to do the research on it. He was our captain for our first ever match in a European competition. He played 214 times for Arsenal, played for England 19 times, and was part of that 1966 World Cup winning England squad as well. So thoughts, of course, with the family of George Eastham, and we are indeed very appreciative for his service to the club. Joey says, if Saka is out for a longer period, would there be a possibility to cut the Vieira loan and bring him back early? I don't think, Joey, that's the answer. I also think that we need to think about Ethan Nwaneri in this situation. You've got a player that is an attacking midfielder, yes, but he's left-footed. And I think there is something to be said about maybe, against Ipswich in particular, giving Ethan Nwaneri an opportunity to play at right wing. That's something that I would quite like to see, is Ethan Nwaneri given the opportunity to play on that right wing, that right-hand side as a left footer, and just see what he could potentially produce for Arsenal. I definitely think there is scope for him to do that, to play kind of off the right-hand side. He has played off the right-hand side a number of times for the youth team as well, despite being primarily an attacking midfielder. But he has played off the right, and I think maybe it's something that at 17 you can still do. I'm not saying we start him against Ipswich on the right. I think you probably start Martinelli on the right-hand side, Trossard on the left, and Jesus through the middle with that Havertz and Ødegaard and Rice as your midfield. But I would like to see Nwaneri given the opportunity to start on that right-hand side. We didn't use him much when Ødegaard was out, so let's see if we can now use him when indeed Saka is missing. Maximia says, Tom, do you think there's a case for getting Martinelli on that right-hand side, a right-footed right winger? He looked all right. It could be. And to be honest, a right-footed right winger is good in terms of kind of the crossing and the cutbacks. And maybe it's something that can give Martinelli a new lease of life in this Arsenal team, and to give him that newfound confidence and to bring him into the fold somewhat more. So yeah, let's wait and see what happens. Jerry says, good call. Also, I like how Nwaneri takes on players when he gets the ball, and he could do some damage on that right-hand side. He is going to be more predictable because he does like to cut inside quite a lot. He's not yet mastered that ability like Saka has to dart onto his right-hand side and use his right foot as effectively. But I really do think that there is some scope for Nwaneri to be given an opportunity, especially against a side like Ipswich, who we would be expected to dominate in that game. So yeah, let's see what Arteta decides to do in the absence of Saka. But I would like to see Nwaneri used in this one. Now, of course, if you are going to be with us for the majority of the season, we want you to always be dropping a like on the video. And as we move into this new year, we are going to be bringing that 1,000 like challenge. It's not back yet, so no pressure, but please do show your support as well. And I'd love for you to join me for the rest of indeed the year and into next year as well, as we continue on this journey of Arsenal's madness and a crazy, crazy season indeed. If you could drop a like, if you could subscribe, if you could, of course, drop a review on any of the 5 stars on any of the audio platforms as well, really would indeed love you to do so. If indeed you aren't with us before now and Christmas, I know some of you tune in for these shows only because you like the reaction shows. Have a fantastic Christmas if you are indeed celebrating. If not, I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, bright and early, looking back on course today's games, huge games in the title race. Chelsea, Liverpool, both are involved. Plenty more discussion and chat to come. And then we have the build-up, of course, to that game against Ipswich. Is there going to be a game on Christmas Day? You bet your ass there's going to be a show on Christmas Day. There is always a show on every single day, be it Christmas, be it birthdays, be it wedding days. There's shows. So make sure you drop a like. See you soon. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy, respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.